"What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday." The words sliced through the wedding reception like broken glass, every head turning to witness my public humiliation. I smiled sweetly at my son's bride, the woman I'd spent $43,000 making happy. "I'm leaving, but first meet my special guest, an old friend of yours." When Ava saw who stood behind me, her face went white as her overpriced dress before she crumpled to the Italian marble floor. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old grandmother ended up orchestrating the most spectacular wedding crash in Charleston's history. Well, let me tell you. It started 6 months ago when my son Henry brought home the most beautiful liar I'd ever met. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Diane Wilson, though everyone calls me Di. And until last week, I thought I was planning the wedding of the century for my beloved only child. I'd emptied my late husband's life insurance policy, cashed in bonds, and even borrowed against my house to give Henry and Ava the fairy tale wedding she claimed to have dreamed about since childhood. The venue, the prestigious Bellamy estate with its sprawling gardens and antebellum charm. The dress, a $12,000 Vera Wang that required 3 alterations. The flowers, 2,000 white roses flown in from Ecuador. I paid for every last petal because Ava's family, she tearfully explained, had disowned her for marrying beneath their social status. My heart bled for this poor African-American woman who'd supposedly given up everything for love. I even offered her my grandmother's pearl necklace, a family heirloom passed down through 4 generations. "Oh, Mrs. Wilson," she'd whispered, eyes glistening with what I thought were tears of gratitude. "You're like the mother I never had." What a performance that was. Henry was completely besotted, and I understood why. Ava was stunning in that effortless way some women are born with, all radiant skin and doe eyes that could make grown men forget their own names. She worked as a pediatric nurse, volunteered at animal shelters, and spoke about wanting children with such genuine longing that I found myself daydreaming about grandchildren. But something nagged at me, a whisper of doubt I couldn't quite silence. Maybe it was the way her stories never quite aligned, or how she'd grown up in so many different places that she couldn't keep her childhood memories straight. Or perhaps it was how she always paid cash for everything, claiming she was old-fashioned about credit cards. Still, Henry was happier than I'd seen him since his father died 3 years ago, and that was enough for me, until the night I discovered the truth that would change everything. "Mom, what do you think of these invitations?" Henry asked, spreading out 3 nearly identical cream-colored cards on my kitchen table. "They all look the same to me, sweetheart," I admitted, squinting through my reading glasses. "Ava says this one has the superior cardstock," he said, pointing to the middle sample. "It's an extra $3 per invitation, but she says people can tell the difference." I nodded, doing quick math in my head. With 300 guests, that was an extra $900 for paper that would end up in the recycling bin. "Whatever makes Ava happy," I said, because that had become our family motto over the past few months. That evening, Ava came over to discuss the catering menu. She'd rejected the first 3 companies I'd suggested, finally settling on a Charleston chef who'd appeared on one of those cooking competition shows. "Di, I know it's a bit over budget," she said, flipping through the proposal that was, in fact, $8,000 over budget. "But this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience." "Of course," I agreed, already mentally calculating which of my remaining investments I could liquidate. "You're the best," she squealed, hugging me tightly. "I keep telling Henry how lucky he is to have such a generous mother." Something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't quite gratitude, it was something closer to satisfaction, as if she'd scored another point in a game I didn't know we were playing. As the months passed, my retirement savings dwindled while the wedding expenses soared. The venue alone cost $15,000, not including the extra fee for the sunset package that Ava insisted upon. Then came the flowers, the band, the photographer who'd shot for Vogue, and the hand-calligraphed place cards. Each time I expressed concern about the mounting costs, Ava would tear up, speaking softly about how her family had always made her feel unworthy, how this wedding was her chance to finally feel valued. And Henry, seeing her distress, would give me that look, the one that said, "Please, Mom, Don't ruin this for us. So I smiled and wrote another check, watching my future security vanish for the sake of a single day's celebration. 3 weeks before the wedding, I invited Ava to lunch, just the two of us. I wanted to give her my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one my mother had worn on her wedding day, and I had worn on mine. These have been in our family for 4 generations, I explained, opening the blue velvet box to reveal the lustrous strand. I'd be honored if you'd wear them for your something borrowed. Oh, Di, Ava breathed, lifting the necklace with careful fingers. They're exquisite. They're just on loan, I reminded her with a gentle smile. Someday, they'll belong to Henry's daughter. A strange expression flickered across her face, something calculating that vanished so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. Of course, she said, clasping the pearls around her neck. I'll treasure them on our special day. As she admired her reflection in the restaurant's mirrored wall, I noticed how she didn't quite meet my eyes. It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd stopped by Henry and Ava's apartment to drop off the wedding favors I'd spent the weekend assembling 300 tiny jars of local honey with custom labels. Henry had texted that they were out having dinner with friends, but the door would be unlocked, and I should leave the box in the hallway. I was about to do just that when I realized I'd forgotten to include the thank you notes Ava had specifically requested. Rather than make another trip, I decided to let myself in and put everything together in their dining room. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of running water. Perhaps they'd left a faucet dripping. I set the box down and was about to leave when I heard Ava's voice coming from the bedroom. "Jason, I told you not to call me on this number," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. Something in her tone made me freeze in the hallway instead of announcing my arrival. "No, the wedding is still on schedule," she continued. "Yes, I'll have access to his accounts after we're married. What do you mean you want a bigger cut?" We agreed on 30%. My blood turned to ice. I pressed myself against the wall, grateful for Henry's ancient hardwood floors that allowed me to hear every damning word. "Look, the old lady has already given us over 40 grand, and she'll probably gift us more money for the house down payment after the wedding. This mark is worth at least 200,000, maybe more." A pause. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's completely hooked." Mark, my son was a mark. I'd heard enough. I crept backward toward the front door, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the box of wedding favors. I managed to leave quietly, but once in my car, I had to pull over 3 blocks away because I was hyperventilating. Everything made horrible sense now. The cash payments, the inconsistent stories, the way she'd isolated Henry from his friends with subtle comments about how they didn't understand their relationship. She'd even convinced him to add her name to his checking account for convenience, and suggested he upgrade his life insurance policy since they were building a future together. I sat in my car for an hour, crying angry tears and feeling like the world's biggest fool. Then something shifted inside me, something hard and determined that I hadn't felt since fighting for my husband's life during his cancer battle. If Ava Thompson thought she could destroy my son and steal our money, she'd picked the wrong family to mess with. But I needed proof, real, undeniable evidence that would open Henry's eyes and expose Ava for what she really was. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do in my lifetime. I Googled private investigators Charleston, SC. I met with Patricia Hayes at a small cafe downtown. Patricia was a former police detective who'd gone private after retiring, specializing in fraud cases. She was probably 10 years younger than me, but had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Wilson," she said after I'd explained the situation, "what you're describing sounds like a classic romance scam with a marriage twist. These people are professionals. They study their targets, learn what they want to hear, and become exactly that person." I slid a check across the table. "How long will it take?" Patricia smiled grimly. For someone stupid enough to use her real voice on the phone, not long at all. But I was wrong. The investigation proved far more challenging than either of us had anticipated. Ava was careful she had a social security number, employment records, and even a LinkedIn profile that checked out at first glance. "She's good," Patricia admitted during our third meeting. "Most scammers leave easy trails, but she's covered her tracks well." "So we have nothing?" I asked, my heart sinking. "I didn't say that," Patricia replied, sliding a folder across the table. I found some inconsistencies in her background. Her social media presence only goes back 3 years. Before that, there's virtually nothing, and her nursing license was issued just 30 months ago, though she claims to have been in the profession for 8 years. That's not enough to convince Henry, I said, flipping through the sparse documentation. No, but it's a start. I've reached out to some former colleagues at the FBI who specialize in identity fraud. They're running her prints through their database. You have her fingerprints? I asked, surprised. Patricia smiled. I have a friend who works at the coffee shop near your son's apartment. Ava comes in every morning for a latte. Same cup, same prints. A week later, Patricia called with results that exceeded my worst fears. Diane, you're going to want to sit down for this, she said, her voice grim over the phone. Ava Thompson doesn't exist. The woman your son is planning to marry is actually Rachel Johnson, and she has quite a history. I was in my kitchen making tea when she called, and I had to grip the counter to keep from collapsing. Tell me everything. Rachel Johnson, 29 years old, originally from Detroit. She's been arrested 3 times in the past 5 years for fraud, though she's only been convicted once. She works with partners, usually men who help her research targets and sometimes pose as family members to add credibility to her stories. My tea kettle was screaming, but I couldn't move to turn it off. The man on the phone, Jason Davis, her most frequent accomplice. They were romantically involved until about 2 years ago when she apparently scammed him out of $20,000 and disappeared. He's been trying to track her down ever since. Finally, I managed to turn off the burner, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind reeled. How did you find all this? The miracle of facial recognition software and some old-fashioned detective work. Rachel's been using the Ava Thompson identity for 8 months, complete with fake social security number and employment history. The pediatric nursing job. She volunteers occasionally at a free clinic, just enough to make the story believable if anyone checks. I sank into my kitchen chair. Patricia, I need you to find this Jason Davis. There was a pause. Diane, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that a man who's been hunting Rachel for 2 years might be very interested in attending her wedding. Patricia's voice carried a note of admiration. You want to bring him to the ceremony? I want to give Ava exactly what she deserves. My voice was steadier than I felt. Can you find him? Already did. He's living in Atlanta now, working construction. I can have his contact information to you within the hour. After hanging up, I sat in my silent kitchen for a long time. Part of me wanted to march straight to Henry and lay out everything Patricia had discovered. But I knew my son. He was stubborn like his father, and Rachel had been working on him for months. She'd probably convinced him that any criticism was just jealousy or an attempt to control his life. No, I needed something more dramatic, something that would expose her so completely that there would be no room for denial or manipulation. The wedding was in 10 days, and I was going to make sure it was unforgettable. That afternoon, I called Jason Davis. Jason Davis speaking. His voice was cautious, professional. I'd caught him during his lunch break at a construction site in Atlanta. Mr. Davis, my name is Diane Wilson. I believe you know my son's fiancée, though you knew her as Rachel Johnson, not Ava Thompson. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then where is she? She's about to marry my son in Charleston in 9 days. She's stolen over $40,000 from us already, and she's just getting started. I kept my voice steady, businesslike. I think we can help each other. Another pause. Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but she told her partner Jason that the mark was worth at least $200,000. She's planning to access my son's bank accounts after the marriage and probably disappear within 6 months. I let that sink in. Ring any bells? His intake of breath was sharp. You heard her talking to Jason. That's me. We had a business arrangement until she screwed me over. Then you understand my position. Mrs. Wilson, what exactly are you proposing? I'd been thinking about this for hours, turning the plan over in my mind like a puzzle piece until it fit perfectly. She's having a church wedding with 300 guests, very public, very prestigious. What if her past walked through those church doors, right in the middle of her moment of triumph? You want me to crash the wedding? There was something like admiration in his voice. I want you to expose her for who she is in front of everyone she's been lying to, in front of my son, who deserves to know the truth before she destroys his life." Jason was quiet for several minutes. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder. "She took $20,000 from me and vanished in the middle of the night. Left me holding the bag on a hotel room bill in a rental car. I've been looking for her for 2 years. Then this is your chance. What's in it for you, besides saving your son? I mean," I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Justice, Mr. Davis?" "Plain and simple justice." We talked for another 20 minutes, working out the details. Jason would drive down the morning of the wedding and wait for my signal. I'd already been uninvited, Rachel having convinced Henry that his mother was trying to sabotage their happiness, but I had ways of getting into the Bellamy estate that didn't involve the front door. "There's something else you should know," Jason said just before we hung up. "Rachel isn't just after money. She's dangerous." "What do you mean?" His voice dropped. "Her last mark before me was an elderly widow in Savannah. Woman lost everything, her savings, her house, even her Social Security checks. When she figured out what was happening, she confronted Rachel." A cold dread settled in my stomach. "What happened?" "Official cause of death was suicide, pills. But I knew that woman. She was a fighter. Religious. No way she would have killed herself." "Are you saying Rachel?" "I'm saying be careful. Mrs. Wilson. And maybe let me handle the confrontation part." After we hung up, I realized I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The helpless fury was gone, replaced by something much more satisfying: purpose. Patricia arrived at my house an hour later with a thick folder. "Everything I could find on Rachel Johnson," she said, placing it on my coffee table. "Police reports, mugshots, known associates, and her pattern of operation." I opened the folder to find a booking photo of Rachel, her hair shorter, her expression harder, but unmistakably the woman who was about to marry my son. "She's been doing this for at least 7 years, Patricia explained, spreading out documents across the table. "Always targets single men with assets or older women with savings. She creates an identity tailored to what they're looking for, works her way into their lives, and then cleans them out." "And the Savannah case?" I asked, thinking of what Jason had told me. Patricia's expression darkened. "Eleanor Covington, 72, Rachel posed as a home health aide, gained her trust, got herself added to the woman's accounts. When Mrs. Covington realized what was happening and threatened to go to the police, she was found dead the next day. Officially ruled a suicide. But the detective who handled the case had his doubts. The pill bottle allegedly used had only Rachel's prints on it, not the victim's. And Mrs. Covington had just scheduled a meeting with her lawyer for the next morning. I shivered despite the warm spring air coming through my open windows. The investigation couldn't prove anything. Though Rachel had an alibi she was at a restaurant with friends when Mrs. Covington supposedly took the pills. Friends who were actually accomplices, I guessed. Patricia nodded. "Most likely. Listen, Diane, this woman is more dangerous than we thought. Maybe we should take this information directly to the police." I shook my head. "Without hard evidence connecting her to Mrs. Covington's death, they won't do anything until after she's taken Henry for everything he has. No, we need to stop this wedding and expose her publicly. Make it impossible for her to simply disappear and start over with a new identity." Patricia looked skeptical but didn't argue. "Just be careful, and maybe don't meet with Jason Davis alone." "I won't," I promised, though I had already decided to do exactly that. The fewer people involved, the less chance of Rachel catching wind of our plan. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I canceled my hair appointment and my dress alteration. If I was going to be uninvited from my son's wedding, I certainly wasn't going to look my best for the occasion. Instead, I focused on other details, like making sure the wedding would have some very expensive complications. 3 days before the wedding, I made a series of phone calls that would have made a corporate raider proud. The first was to the Bellamy Estates event coordinator. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Diane Wilson, mother of the groom for the Wilson-Thompson wedding on Saturday." "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, how lovely to hear from you. I hope you're excited for the big day." If only she knew. "Actually, I'm calling because there's been a change in the payment arrangement. The bride's family has decided to cover the final balance after all. I paused, letting my voice fill with the kind of grandmotherly pleasure that event coordinators lived for. It's so wonderful when families come together. Don't you think? That's absolutely lovely. Should I expect a payment from them directly? Oh, yes. They'll be handling everything from here on out. In fact, you should probably hold off on processing any payments from my account until you hear directly from the Thompson family. I gave her the fake phone number Patricia had confirmed Rachel was using for wedding vendors. They're very particular about handling their own finances. The second call was to the florist, the third to the caterer, the fourth to the photographer. Each conversation was similar. The bride's family was taking over final payments, so pleased to be reconciling with their daughter, so excited to contribute to this special day. Of course, the Thompson family didn't exist, and Rachel would have no idea that vendors were trying to reach her on a number she never answered. By Saturday morning, the Bellamy estate would be facing a very expensive problem with no immediate solution, but my masterpiece was the call I made to Henry. "Mom," he sounded tired, stressed. "I really can't talk right now. Ava's been upset about you not being at the rehearsal dinner, and Henry, sweetheart, I completely understand Ava's feelings." My voice dripped with the kind of maternal understanding that had soothed his scraped knees and broken hearts for 32 years. In fact, I've been doing some thinking, and I realize I may have been a bit overbearing about the wedding plans. Silence. Then really, this is Ava's day, and if she feels my presence would be stressful, then of course I should respect that. I paused for effect. I love you too much to do anything that might spoil your happiness. Mom, his voice cracked slightly. Are you sure Ava might change her mind if you talk to her? Oh, darling, I don't think that's necessary. You know what, I'm going to take a little trip this weekend. Maybe drive up to Savannah, do some antiquing, give you two some space to enjoy your special day without any family drama. The relief in his voice was painful to hear. That's really thoughtful of you, Mom. I just want you to be happy. Sweetheart, that's all I've ever wanted. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. The conversation had been necessary, but it hurt in ways I hadn't expected. Henry genuinely believed I was the problem, that my concerns about Ava came from selfishness or jealousy rather than maternal instinct. Well, by Sunday morning, he'd understand everything. Friday evening, Rachel called me herself. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Mrs. Wilson, it's Ava." Her voice was sugar-sweet with just a hint of vulnerability. "I wanted to thank you for being so understanding about tomorrow." "Not at all, dear. I completely understand." I matched her tone perfectly. "A bride should feel completely comfortable on her wedding day." "That's so gracious of you. Henry said you're going to Savannah for the weekend." Fishing for information. Classic. "That's the plan. A little mother of the groom getaway while you two start your honeymoon." "Well, I hope you have a wonderful time. And Mrs. Wilson, after Henry and I get settled, maybe we could have lunch. I'd really like for us to be friends." The audacity was breathtaking. "That sounds lovely. Ava, I'm sure we'll have so much to talk about." After ending the call, I poured myself a generous glass of wine and toasted my reflection in the kitchen window. "Here's to family friends. Diane," I said aloud. "May they get exactly what they deserve." Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that wedding photographers call romantic and brides call disastrous. I woke up at 5:00 a.m., too excited to sleep, and spent the morning preparing for what would either be the most brilliant or most catastrophic day of my life. At 9:00, Jason Davis called from a gas station 20 minutes outside Charleston. "I'm here, Mrs. Wilson. You sure about this?" I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, dressed in a simple black dress with my hair perfectly styled. Around my neck gleamed another strand of pearls, not as valuable as the family heirlooms I'd given to Rachel, but elegant nonetheless. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. What if your son doesn't forgive you? It was a question I'd been avoiding for days. Then I'll have saved him from a woman who would have destroyed him financially and emotionally. Sometimes love means being the villain in someone else's story until they're ready to see the truth. "Damn, you're tougher than you sound." I almost smiled. "Mr. Davis, I raised a son, buried a husband, and survived 67 years in the South. I'm tougher than I look, too. The wedding was scheduled for 2:00 with the reception immediately following in the estate's grand ballroom. I'd timed everything perfectly. Jason would arrive at the venue at 1:30 and wait in his car until I texted him. I would enter through the garden entrance, a route I knew well from my multiple venue visits, and position myself where I could watch the ceremony unfold. At 11:00 a.m., my phone started ringing. First the florist, then the caterer, then the venue coordinator. All panicked, all trying to reach someone from the Thompson family about outstanding balances that needed to be resolved immediately. I let every call go to voicemail. At noon, Henry called. "Mom, something weird is happening. All the wedding vendors are calling Ava about payments, but she says she never told them her family was handling anything. Do you know what's going on?" "Oh my goodness, that does sound confusing. What did Ava say?" "She's pretty upset. She thinks someone is trying to sabotage the wedding." There was a pause. "Mom, you wouldn't. Henry Wilson, are you suggesting your mother would sabotage your wedding?" I injected just the right amount of hurt into my voice. After everything I've done to help make this day perfect. No, I'm sorry. Ava is really stressed, and when people are stressed, sometimes they look for someone to blame. I finished gently. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure it's just a vendor mix-up. These things happen. The important thing is that you're marrying the woman you love today." If only he knew how true that statement was about to become. After hanging up, I checked my watch, 100 time to get into position for the show of a lifetime. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and headed for my car. The drive to the Bellamy estate took 15 minutes through Charleston's historic district. Spanish moss draped the ancient oak trees like bridal veils. And despite everything, I felt a pang of sadness that this beautiful venue would forever be associated with deception rather than celebration. But Rachel Johnson had made her choices, and now she was about to face the consequences. I parked 2 blocks away from the Bellamy estate and walked to the back entrance, the one near the catering kitchen that I'd spotted during my venue tours. The staff was too busy dealing with payment crises to pay attention to one more woman in a black dress carrying flowers. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "In position, back parking lot, blue pickup." I made my way around the perimeter of the estate, keeping to the shadows of the towering oak trees. When I reached the employee parking area, I spotted Jason immediately. He was leaning against an older model Ford F-150, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked recently purchased. In person. Jason Davis was not what I'd expected. From our phone conversations, I'd imagined someone rougher, more overtly dangerous. Instead, I found myself face to face with a clean-cut man in his mid-30s with intelligent eyes and a cautious demeanor. "Mrs. Wilson," he extended his hand. "Good to finally meet you." His handshake was firm, confident. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Davis." "Jason, please." He glanced toward the main building where staff was rushing about in pre-wedding panic. "Looks like your payment plan is working. Place is in chaos." "That's just the appetizer," I replied. "The main course is yet to come." Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. "Everything you need to know about Rachel Johnson, her priors, her patterns, her victims." He hesitated. "And the evidence I've been collecting on the Covington case." I took the folder, my fingers trembling slightly. "You really believe she was responsible for that woman's death?" His expression hardened. "I know she was. Rachel doesn't leave loose ends, especially ones that could send her to prison, but proving it," he shook his head. "That's why I've been tracking her for 2 years." "Tell me more about her," I said, needing to understand exactly who we were dealing with. Jason leaned back against his truck. Rachel grew up in the system, foster care, juvenile detention, the works, had a rough childhood, which might explain some things but doesn't excuse them. She learned early how to read people, how to become whatever they needed. "How did you meet her?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was her partner, not her mark. We worked together on smaller cons credit card scams, insurance fraud, nothing violent." He looked away. "At least, that's what I thought until Savannah." "What happened?" "Rachel met Mrs. Covington at a church fundraiser. Sweet old lady, Recently widowed, plenty of money. Rachel saw an opportunity and inserted herself as a home health aide. I played the concerned nephew, visiting occasionally. He ran a hand over his face. It was supposed to be a simple financial scam. Get added to the accounts, siphon off funds gradually, disappear when it got risky. But it went wrong, I prompted when he fell silent. Mrs. Covington was sharper than we expected. She noticed discrepancies in her bank statements, confronted Rachel. I wasn't there. I was setting up our next job in Atlanta. Rachel called me, said there was a problem, that she needed to handle it. His voice grew tight. Next thing I hear, Mrs. Covington is dead from an apparent overdose. And you think Rachel? I know she did. Rachel showed up in Atlanta 3 days later with 20 grand more than she should have had, and a story about how Mrs. Covington got suspicious, so she had to cut and run early. But something was off. She was jumpy, drinking more than usual. Then I found a bottle of the same prescription pills in her bag that supposedly killed Mrs. Covington. My blood ran cold. Did you confront her? I made the mistake of asking too many questions. Next morning, she was gone along with my share of our previous jobs and my identity documents. His expression darkened. Left me with nothing but suspicions and a hotel bill I couldn't pay. So this isn't just about the money she took from you. I realized. Jason met my eyes. No, Mrs. Wilson. It's about justice for Eleanor Covington and making sure your son isn't next. I swallowed hard. The gravity of our situation suddenly very real. Do you have actual evidence that would hold up in court? Not enough for a murder conviction, but enough to trigger a serious investigation if the right people see it. He gestured to the folder I was holding. That's why I've documented everything. The pills, Rachel's unexplained cash, her previous financial scams, the patterns. Get enough people looking at her, and something will stick. I nodded, understanding now why Jason had been so eager to help with my plan. This wasn't just revenge for him, it was redemption. There's one more thing, Jason said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small digital recorder. I've got her on tape discussing our cons, including mentioning Mrs. Covington. It's 2 years old, but it's her voice, her words, admitting to financial fraud, at minimum. Will you use this today? If necessary, but we need to be careful alert her too early, and she might run. We need to box her in completely. I checked my watch. The ceremony starts in 1 hour. Let's go over the plan one more time. Back in my car, I reviewed the folder Jason had given me. It contained copies of police reports, newspaper clippings about suspicious deaths of elderly people with suddenly changed wills, and photos of Rachel with different hair colors and styles, using different names. One photo particularly caught my attention, Rachel, or Bethany Williams, as she was calling herself then, standing beside a frail-looking elderly man. The caption read, Harold Mercer, 79, with his new fiancée Bethany, 28 at the Savannah Yacht Club, 3 weeks before his fatal heart attack. 3 weeks before his fatal heart attack, and less than a year before Eleanor Covington's suicide, my phone rang, startling me. It was Patricia. I'm at the venue, she said without preamble. You need to know that Rachel is acting strangely. She's been on her phone constantly, looking worried. Do you think she suspects something? Hard to say, but she's definitely on edge. And there's something else I overheard her arguing with someone in the bridal suite. A man's voice I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. Another accomplice. Possibly. Just be careful. Diane, this woman is dangerous, and she might not be working alone. After hanging up, I texted Jason about Patricia's observations. His response was immediate. Change of plans to meet me at the chapel's side entrance in 20 minutes. I drove closer to the venue and parked behind a catering van. The Bellamy estate was now buzzing with activity guests arriving in their finery, staff rushing to complete last-minute preparations, and a string quartet setting up near the garden where the ceremony would take place. I spotted Patricia near the entrance, dressed in an elegant blue dress that made her look like just another guest rather than a private investigator. She nodded subtly as I walked past, confirming she was in position. Jason was waiting at our designated meeting spot, his expression tense. Change of plan, he said in a low voice. Rachel's onto something. She's been calling around to all the vendors, trying to sort out the payment confusion. How would she know I was behind it? She wouldn't for sure, but she's suspicious, and suspicious is dangerous with Rachel. He handed me a small earpiece. Take this. Patricia and I will both be wearing one too. We need to coordinate once things start moving. I slipped the device into my ear, marveling at how invisible it was. What's the new plan? I'll enter during the ceremony as we discussed, but you stay hidden until I give the signal. If Rachel sees you before we're ready, she might bolt. And what about the other man Patricia heard? Jason's expression darkened. Could be her new partner. We need to identify him and make sure he doesn't interfere. I nodded, my heart racing. This was becoming more complicated by the minute, but there was no turning back now. One more thing, Jason said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to me. Inside was a pearl earring, a perfect match to my grandmother's necklace that Rachel was currently wearing. Where did you get this? I asked, stunned. Rachel pawned one earring in Atlanta before we split up. Said she found it in a hotel room. His mouth twisted in a grim smile. I tracked it down after she disappeared. Thought it might be evidence someday. I closed my fingers around the earring, emotion welling up in my throat. Thank you. Just make sure your son sees it. Physical proof is harder to explain away than words. With our new plan in place, I moved to my position behind a massive oak tree with a clear view of the garden ceremony space. Through my earpiece, I could hear Patricia giving updates. Guests all seated. Groom and best man in position. Bride still in the main house. I watched as Henry took his place at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy. My heart ached seeing him there, so blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. Then Patricia's voice crackled in my ear again. Alert, unknown male, mid-40s, just entered from the east side, moving toward the bridal preparation area. Description, Jason asked sharply. Tall, balding, expensive suit. He's carrying something. Looks like a briefcase. That's not a wedding guest, Jason muttered. That's a business meeting. A chill ran through me. Could they be planning to leave after the ceremony, skip the reception entirely? Possibly. Rachel's spooked about something. Jason paused. Change of plan again. I'm going to intercept this mystery man before he reaches Rachel. Patricia, can you delay the ceremony somehow? On it, she replied. I watched as Patricia seemingly stumbled near the string quartet, knocking over a music stand and creating a minor commotion. As the musicians scrambled to reorganize their sheet music, she apologized profusely, effectively buying us precious minutes. Through my earpiece, I heard Jason's breathing as he moved quickly. I've got eyes on the mystery man. He's outside the bridal suite, waiting. Then came the unmistakable sound of a door opening, and Rachel's voice, tense and angry. You're late. Did you bring it? A male voice responded, too low to make out the words. No, Rachel snapped. That wasn't our agreement. I need the new documents today, after the ceremony. We're leaving straight for the airport. My heart pounded. She was planning to run today, with my son. Mrs. Wilson. Jason's voice was urgent in my ear. Change of plan. The ceremony is our only shot. Rachel's planning to leave with your son immediately after. She has tickets booked. How do you know a mystery man is a document forger, high-end? He's delivered new passports. I felt sick. This was worse than I'd imagined. Not just financial fraud, but potentially kidnapping my son to another country where she could clean out his accounts without interference. Jason, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Do whatever it takes. We stop this now. By 1:45, guests were seated in the garden. The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's Canon, and there was no sign of the payment issues being resolved. The wedding coordinator was visibly stressed, whispering urgently to assistants who scurried back and forth between the main house and the garden. Through my earpiece, I heard Patricia reporting. Rachel's still in the bridal suite. The forger left, but she's keeping her bridesmaids outside. She's alone in there. What's she doing? I asked. Can't tell, but she's making calls. Looks agitated. I checked my watch. The ceremony should have started by now, but there was clearly a delay. At the altar, Henry was shifting uncomfortably, glancing at his watch. Then Patricia's voice again. She's coming out. Ceremony starting. The string quartet transitioned to the wedding march, and the bridesmaids began their procession down the aisle. Through a gap in the trees, I could see their pastel dresses against the lush green backdrop of the Bellamy Gardens. And then Rachel appeared, a vision in white. My breath caught despite everything. She was stunning in the $12,000 Vera Wang dress, my grandmother's pearls gleaming at her throat. Her expression was radiant, showing no sign of the tension Patricia had reported minutes earlier. As she took her first step down the aisle, Jason's voice came through my earpiece. "I'm in position. Wait for my signal." I watched as Rachel glided toward Henry, who looked at her with such love and trust that my heart broke all over again. The minister began the ceremony, his voice carrying across the garden as he welcomed the guests to this joyous union. When he reached the part about if anyone knows why these two should not be joined in matrimony, my fingers tightened around the pearl earring in my pocket. But Jason had been clear that moment was too predictable. Rachel would be prepared for it. Instead, we waited until the vows began, as Rachel began to promise to love, honor, and cherish Henry till death do us part. Jason stepped out from behind a pillar at the back of the seating area. "Rachel Johnson," his voice rang out, silencing the ceremony instantly. "Did you make those same promises to Harold Mercer before his convenient heart attack?" Every head turned. Rachel froze, the color draining from her face as she saw Jason standing there. For a split second, naked fear crossed her features before she composed herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady. "There must be some mistake." "My name is Ava Thompson." Henry looked between Rachel and Jason, confusion etched on his face. "What's going on? Who are you?" Jason walked slowly down the aisle, his movements deliberate. "My name is Jason Davis, and until 2 years ago, I was partners with the woman you know as Ava, except her real name is Rachel Johnson, and she's wanted in 3 states for fraud." A murmur rippled through the guests. Rachel's eyes darted around, clearly looking for an escape route. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "Henry, this man is clearly disturbed. Can someone call security?" But Jason wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and held it up. "I have recordings of Rachel planning her cons, including discussions about her last victim, an elderly woman named Eleanor Covington, who died under suspicious circumstances after confronting Rachel about stolen money." Rachel's composure slipped again, just for a moment. Her eyes widened, and her hand moved unconsciously to touch the pearls at her throat. That was my cue. I stepped out from my hiding place and walked slowly toward the altar. "Those pearls belong to my family. Rachel. 4 generations of Wilson women have worn them on their wedding day." The collective gasp from the guests was audible. Henry turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Mom, what are you doing here? You said you were in Savannah." I lied. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Something I learned from watching the experts." Rachel's face contorted with fury. "You orchestrated this," she hissed. "You jealous, interfering old woman." "I exposed it," I corrected. "There's a difference." Henry looked between us, confusion giving way to anger. "What is going on here? Someone explain now." That's when Jason played his trump card. He tapped his phone, and Rachel's voice filled the garden. "The old bat is so desperate for grandchildren. She'll believe anything, and the son complete mama's boy. All I have to do is cry about my tragic past, and he writes another check." There was a pause, then Rachel's recorded voice continued. "You want to hear the best part?" She gave me her grandmother's pearl necklace, said it was a family heirloom. I'll probably hawk it after the honeymoon. Henry's face went white, then red, then a sickly gray color that made me want to rush to his side. But this moment wasn't about protecting him anymore. It was about him finally seeing the truth. I stepped forward, opening my palm to reveal the single pearl earring. "This is from the set. Henry. Jason found it in a pawn shop in Atlanta 2 years ago, where Rachel sold it after stealing it from another victim." Rachel's eyes darted between the earring and the exit. "Henry," she said, her voice suddenly soft, vulnerable. "They're lying. I can explain everything." "Explain what?" Henry's voice was deadly quiet. Explain how you've been laughing at my mother behind her back while spending her money. Explain how you called me a mama's boy while pretending to love me. He turned to look at Jason. How do I know you're telling the truth? Where's your proof? Jason handed his phone to Henry. All the evidence is here. Police reports, photos of Rachel under different names, audio recordings. Plus, your mother hired a private investigator who uncovered Rachel's fake identity. The nursing license, the social security number, all forgeries. Henry scrolled through the phone, his expression growing darker with each swipe. When he looked up, his eyes were cold. Is your name even Ava Thompson? The fight seemed to go out of Rachel all at once. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked her actual age instead of the innocent young woman she'd been pretending to be. It started as a job, she said quietly. Just another mark. But then, I don't know. I thought maybe I could make it real. By lying about everything. Henry's voice cracked. Your name, your job, your family, your entire life story. What exactly was supposed to be real about us? Rachel looked around the garden one more time, taking in the hundreds of faces staring at her with mixtures of shock, disgust, and fascination. The elaborate flower arrangements, the photographer who was still snapping pictures, the videographer who was capturing every moment of her public humiliation. I need to leave, she whispered. Yes, Henry said simply. You do. But Rachel Johnson wasn't quite finished. As she gathered up her dress to walk back down the aisle, she turned to face me with a look of pure hatred. You think you've won, don't you? Congratulations. Mrs. Wilson, you got your precious son back. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. But you know what? He's never going to trust another woman again after this. You've ruined him for love forever. Also, you'll stay the most important woman in his life. Isn't that what you really wanted? The words hit their mark. I felt a stab of doubt, wondering if my quest for justice had crossed the line into something darker and more selfish. But Henry surprised me. No, he said firmly, having overheard her words. She didn't ruin me. You did. And you know what the difference is. Mom was trying to protect me. You were trying to destroy me. Rachel's face twisted with fury. You'll regret this. Both of you. I have friends, connections. This isn't over. Jason stepped forward, his expression amused. Actually, it is over. See? While you've been putting on your little performance here, the FBI has been very interested in our conversation about your current con game. They're particularly fascinated by your fake social security number and fraudulent employment history. Rachel's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Already did, sweetheart. They should be here any minute to escort you out. He checked his watch. In fact, I'm surprised they haven't arrived yet. As if summoned by his words, 2 men in dark suits appeared at the garden entrance. They moved with the purposeful stride of federal agents, and Rachel's last hope of a dignified exit evaporated. Rachel Johnson, the taller agent held up his badge. FBI, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. What followed was a scene I'd never imagined witnessing at my son's wedding. Federal agents reading Miranda rights in a garden decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Wedding guests fumbling for their phones to record history in the making. A bride in a $12,000 dress being led away in handcuffs. Rachel didn't go quietly as the agents escorted her down the aisle. She kept turning back to scream at Henry and me. This is harassment! I haven't done anything wrong. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Half the guests were recording her arrest, and the other half was already texting the news to friends and family who'd missed the show. By evening, the video would be all over social media with hashtags like wedding crash and con artist bride. After the agents left with Rachel, an eerie silence settled over the garden. 300 wedding guests sat in their chairs, unsure whether to leave or stay, congratulate or commiserate. The minister stood at the altar looking like he'd never encountered this situation in seminary school. Henry remained at the altar, still wearing his tuxedo, staring at the path where his bride had just been arrested. I wanted to go to him, but something held me back. This was his moment to process, to grieve, to figure out what came next. Finally, he turned to face the congregation. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the silent garden. "This is awkward." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I want to thank everyone for coming today. I know this isn't how you expected to spend your Saturday afternoon." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "The wedding is obviously canceled, but the reception is already paid for, so if anyone wants to stay for dinner and an open bar, you're welcome to it. God knows I could use a drink." This time the laughter was more genuine. People began standing, stretching, talking in small groups as the shock wore off and the reality of the situation set in. Henry finally looked in my direction. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and something that might have been admiration. He walked down the aisle toward me, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. When he reached me, he stopped and just stood there for a moment, studying my face. "Mom," he said finally, "we need to talk." I nodded. "Yes, we do. But first," I reached up and carefully unclasped my pearl necklace. "These belong to you." Henry shook his head. "No, Mom. They belong to the woman I eventually marry, when I find someone worthy of them." My eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Henry, for not protecting you better, for letting this happen." "You did protect me," he said quietly, "in the only way I would have believed." He glanced around at the scattered guests, some of whom were already making their way toward the reception hall where the bar was opening early. "Though I have to admit, your methods are dramatic." "I learned from your father," I said with a small smile. "He always said that sometimes you need a big gesture to get through someone's thick skull." Henry laughed despite everything. He would have loved this, the FBI raid especially. He would have been first in line at the bar afterward. I agreed. Henry offered me his arm. "Speaking of which, shall we? I think we both could use a drink before we have that talk." As we walked toward the reception hall, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The worst was over. Henry knew the truth. Rachel was in custody. And somehow, miraculously, my son didn't hate me for orchestrating the most dramatic wedding interruption in Charleston history. The reception that wasn't a reception turned out to be the most honest party I'd ever attended, with the pretense of a wedding celebration stripped away. People relaxed in a way they never do at formal events. The bar opened early, the band played blues instead of wedding classics, and conversations flowed with the kind of authenticity that only comes after shared trauma. Henry handled himself with more grace than I dared hope. He worked the room like a politician, thanking people for coming, apologizing for the drama, and accepting condolences with good humor. I watched him from across the ballroom and felt a pride that had nothing to do with his professional achievements or his choice in women. This was my son showing real character under pressure. Jason Davis found me by the dessert table where I was contemplating whether it was appropriate to eat wedding cake when there hadn't actually been a wedding. "Mrs. Wilson?" He extended his hand. "I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to face Rachel after all this time." I shook his hand. "I should thank you. I could never have exposed her without your help. What you did took guts. Not many mothers would go to those lengths to protect their child." "Any mother would have done the same thing," I said. Jason smiled. "No, ma'am. Most mothers would have tried to talk their son out of it and failed. You played chess while the rest of us were playing checkers." After he left, I found myself alone with my thoughts for the first time all day. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and something that might have been sadness. Yes, I'd saved Henry from a terrible marriage and potential financial ruin, but I'd also destroyed his faith in love, at least temporarily. Had I done the right thing? "Mom?" Henry appeared beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like you're having second thoughts." I accepted the glass gratefully. "Just wondering if there might have been a gentler way to handle this." "You mean like sitting me down and explaining that my fiancé was a con artist, because we both know how well I would have received that news." He had a point. "You would have thought I was jealous and controlling. I would have accused you of exactly what Rachel said, trying to keep me dependent on you forever." Henry sipped his champagne. "You know what changed my mind?" It wasn't Jason showing up or even the recording. It was watching Rachel's face when she realized you'd outplayed her. For just a second, her mask slipped completely, and I saw who she really was underneath all that sweetness. What did you see? Cold calculation and genuine respect for a worthy opponent. He turned to look at me. She underestimated you completely. She thought you were just a lonely old woman who'd do anything to keep her son happy. She had no idea she was trying to con someone smarter than she was. I'm not sure about smarter, I mused. Maybe just more motivated. Mom, you orchestrated the exposure of a professional con artist using her own partner in the FBI. That wasn't just maternal instinct. That was strategy. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching our friends and family enjoy the party that had risen from the ashes of disaster. The band was playing jazz now, and several couples had started dancing. I have a confession, Henry said eventually. What's that? Part of me is relieved. He paused, searching for words. Not about the public humiliation or the arrest, but something always felt off about Ava. I could never put my finger on it. But sometimes when I'd catch her off guard, she'd look at me like she was trying to remember who she was supposed to be. Why didn't you say anything? Because I thought it was just wedding stress. And because, he sighed, because I was 32 years old and had never been in love before. I thought if I questioned it too hard, it might disappear. My heart ached for him. Oh, sweetheart. I know. Pathetic, right? The mama's boy who falls for the first pretty girl who pays attention to him. No, I said firmly. Human. You're human. And humans want to be loved. There's nothing pathetic about that. Even when they make terrible choices about who to trust. I paused. Especially then. I took his hand. Henry, what Rachel did to you, that wasn't your fault. She's a professional liar who studied you, learned what you wanted to hear, and became exactly that person. You weren't gullible. You were targeted. Henry squeezed my hand. Thanks, Mom, for everything. For seeing through her. For protecting me. And for doing it in a way that made sure I couldn't ignore the truth. You're welcome. But next time you fall in love, maybe introduce me earlier in the process. He laughed. Next time I fall in love, I'm running a full background check first. That might be a bit extreme. After today, I don't think so. He grinned. Besides, I've learned something very important about the women in my life. What's that? Never underestimate a Wilson woman. We're apparently much more dangerous than we look. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Your grandmother would have been proud. She would have loved watching all this unfold. Henry raised his glass. Here's to justice. Served ice cold with a side of public humiliation. I raised my glass to meet his. Here's to family and knowing when to fight for the people you love. As we clinked glasses, I realized that despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the public spectacle, I was exactly where I belonged, standing beside my son, who was safe and free, and finally seeing clearly again. Sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen. By 2:15, I was positioned behind a marble column in the back of the chapel, watching my son's face glow with happiness as he waited for his bride to walk down the aisle. In 15 minutes, that happiness would be shattered, and I would be responsible. But sometimes, I reminded myself as the wedding march began to play, love requires you to be strong enough to break someone's heart in order to save their life. The chapel doors opened, and Rachel Johnson, playing the role of Ava Thompson for the last time, began her walk down the aisle in her $12,000 dress and my grandmother's pearls. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Jason Davis. Now. Jason walked through those chapel doors like an avenging angel in a rumpled suit. Every head turned as he strode down the aisle with the confidence of a man who'd been hunting his prey for 2 years. Rachel's bouquet of white roses hit the marble floor with a sound like breaking glass. Rachel Johnson, Jason called out, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. Did you really think you could hide forever? The chaos that followed was everything I'd imagined and more. Henry stepped protectively in front of his bride, confusion written across his face. Sir, I think you have the wrong person. This is Ava Thompson. Jason laughed. a sound devoid of any humor. Ava Thompson, is that what she's calling herself now? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. Her real name is Rachel Johnson, and she's a professional con artist. I should know. I was her partner until she stole $20,000 from me. That's not true. Rachel's voice was shrill, desperate. Henry, I don't know this man. He's clearly mentally ill, but I could see the cracks forming in her performance. Her hands were shaking, and that honey-sweet voice had developed a sharp edge that hadn't been there before. The mask was finally slipping. Jason opened the folder and held up photographs. Here's Rachel at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami running a credit card scam on elderly tourists. Here she is in Birmingham posing as a cancer patient to steal from church collection funds. His voice grew colder with each revelation. And here's my favorite, Rachel leaving our hotel room in Memphis with my wallet, my watch, and the engagement ring I was stupid enough to buy her. Henry's face had gone pale. Ava, what is he talking about? He's lying. Rachel's voice cracked. Henry, you know me. We're getting married. I love you. Love? Jason barked. Lady, you wouldn't recognize love if it bit you on your lying ass. You want to know what she really thinks about your precious Henry? I've got recordings from our partnership. Want to hear what she called him, her pathetic mama's boy Mark? The wedding guests were murmuring now, a low buzz of shock and confusion spreading through the chapel. I watched from behind my column as my son's world crumbled in real time, and despite everything, my heart ached for him. But Rachel wasn't finished fighting. Even if any of that were true, she said, forcing her voice back to its practiced sweetness. People can change. I'm not that person anymore. Henry believes in second chances. Don't you, darling? It was a masterful manipulation, appealing to Henry's fundamental decency and making him choose between believing in human redemption or accepting that the woman he loved was a complete fabrication. Unfortunately for Rachel, I'd given Jason one more piece of ammunition. Second chances. Jason smiled coldly. Tell him about the other Mark, Rachel. The one you're working right now. Henry turned to look at his bride, and I saw the exact moment when doubt crept into his eyes. What is he talking about, Ava? I have no idea, but her voice was too quick, too defensive. Jason consulted his phone. Let me refresh your memory. 3 weeks ago, you called me asking for advice about a quote. Lonely old bat who's already given you $40,000. Ring any bells? The silence that followed Jason's revelation was deafening. Every eye in the chapel turned to Rachel, waiting for her response. I watched my son's face transform as understanding slowly dawned, and I had to grip the marble column to keep from revealing my position. That's... Rachel's voice failed her. She tried again. That's taken out of context. Context. Henry's voice was barely a whisper. You called my mother a lonely old bat. Henry, no, I didn't mean it that way. This man is trying to what? Tell the truth. Henry's voice was growing stronger. Anger replacing confusion. My mother has given us everything. She emptied her savings account for our wedding. She borrowed against her house so you could have your dream ceremony. The wedding guests were no longer murmuring. They were listening intently to every word. I spotted several people recording with their phones, including Henry's college roommate, who looked like he was live streaming the whole disaster. Jason wasn't done. You want to know the real kicker? She was planning to clean out your bank accounts and disappear within 6 months. It's her standard timeline, long enough to establish legal claim to marital assets, short enough to avoid getting too attached. Stop it, Rachel pleaded. But her composure was completely gone now. Tears streamed down her face. But whether they were genuine or part of the performance, I couldn't tell. Henry stepped away from her, his face a mask of disgust and betrayal. Is it true, any of it? Rachel looked around desperately, like a trapped animal seeking escape. The chapel doors were blocked by curious guests who'd moved closer to hear better. The altar offered no sanctuary. Finally, her gaze found mine across the crowded space. Our eyes met, and I saw recognition bloom on her face. She knew exactly who had orchestrated this moment. For the first time since she'd entered our lives, Rachel Johnson was facing someone who was smarter, more ruthless, and infinitely more motivated than she was. You, she whispered, pointing directly at me. This was you. All heads turned to follow her finger, and suddenly I found myself the center of attention in a way I'd never intended. So much for staying hidden until the grand finale. Henry's eyes widened when he spotted me. Mom, what are you doing here? You said you were going to Savannah. I stepped out from behind the column, straightening my pearl necklace with as much dignity as I could muster. I lied, sweetheart. Something I learned from watching the experts. You orchestrated this. Henry's voice was a mixture of horror and admiration. I exposed it, I corrected. There's a difference. Rachel had found her voice again, and with it, her talent for manipulation. She's jealous. Henry, your mother couldn't stand that you chose me over her. She hired this man to destroy our wedding because she wants to control your life forever. It was a clever last-ditch effort, playing on every mother-in-law stereotype in existence. For a moment, I saw doubt creep back into Henry's eyes. 29 years of Rachel's practiced manipulation versus 67 years of my love and sacrifice. Which would he choose to believe? That's when Jason played his trump card. Mrs. Wilson didn't hire me. Lady, I volunteered. He held up his phone again. Want to hear the recording I made of our conversation 3 weeks ago? The one where you laugh about how easy it is to manipulate lonely old women and their devoted sons. The recording quality wasn't perfect, but Rachel's voice came through crystal clear. The old bat is so desperate for grandchildren. She'll believe anything. And the son complete mama's boy. All I have to do is cry about my tragic past, and he writes another check. Henry's face went white, then red, then a sickly gray color that made me want to rush to his side. But this moment wasn't about protecting him anymore. It was about him finally seeing the truth. You want to hear the best part? Rachel's voice continued from the phone. She gave me her grandmother's pearl necklace, said it was a family heirloom. I'll probably hawk it after the honeymoon. Instinctively, Henry's eyes went to Rachel's throat, where my grandmother's pearls gleamed against her pale skin. The pearls that had been worn by 4 generations of Wilson women, passed down from mother to daughter-in-law as a symbol of acceptance and love. Rachel's hands flew to her neck, covering the necklace as if she could hide the evidence. Henry, I can explain. Explain what? His voice was deadly quiet now. Explain how you've been laughing at my mother behind her back while spending her money. Explain how you called me a mama's boy while pretending to love me. Explain how you were planning to rob us blind and disappear. The fight went out of Rachel all at once. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked her actual age instead of the innocent young woman she'd been pretending to be. It started as a job, she said quietly. Just another mark. But then, I don't know. I thought maybe I could make it real. Henry's voice cracked. By lying about your name, your job, your family, your entire life story, what exactly was supposed to be real about us? Rachel looked around the chapel one more time, taking in the hundreds of faces staring at her with mixtures of shock, disgust, and fascination. The elaborate flower arrangements, the photographer who was still snapping pictures, the videographer who was capturing every moment of her public humiliation. I need to leave, she whispered. Yes, Henry said simply. You do? But Rachel Johnson wasn't quite finished. As she gathered up her dress to walk down the aisle, she turned back to face me with a look of pure hatred. You think you've won, don't you? Congratulations, Mrs. Wilson. You got your precious son back. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. But you know what he's never going to trust another woman again after this. You've ruined him for love forever. Also, you'll stay the most important woman in his life. Isn't that what you really wanted? The words hit their mark. I felt a stab of doubt, wondering if my quest for justice had crossed the line into something darker and more selfish. But Henry surprised me. No, he said firmly, having overheard her words. She didn't ruin me. You did. And you know what the difference is. Mom was trying to protect me. You were trying to destroy me. Rachel's face twisted with fury. You'll regret this. Both of you. I have friends. Connections. This isn't over. Jason stepped forward, his expression amused. Actually, it is over. See, while you've been putting on your little performance here, The FBI has been very interested in our conversation about your current con game. They're particularly fascinated by your fake social security number and fraudulent employment history. Rachel's face went pale. You wouldn't dare! Already did, sweetheart. They should be here any minute to escort you out. He checked his watch. In fact, I'm surprised they haven't arrived yet. As if summoned by his words, 2 men in dark suits appeared at the chapel entrance. They moved with the purposeful stride of federal agents, and Rachel's last hope of a dignified exit evaporated. Rachel Johnson? The taller agent held up his badge. FBI, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. What followed was a scene I'd never imagined witnessing at my son's wedding. Federal agents reading Miranda rights in a chapel decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Wedding guests fumbling for their phones to record history in the making. A bride in a $12,000 dress being led away in handcuffs. Rachel didn't go quietly. As the agents escorted her down the aisle, she kept turning back to scream at Henry and me. This is harassment. I haven't done anything wrong. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Half the chapel was recording her arrest, and the other half was already texting the news to friends and family who'd missed the show. By evening, the video would be all over social media with hashtags like #weddingcrash and #conartistbride. As she reached the chapel doors, Rachel made one last desperate attempt. Henry, please don't let them do this. I love you. But Henry just watched in silence, his expression unreadable as the woman he'd planned to spend his life with was escorted into a waiting FBI vehicle. After the agents left with Rachel, an eerie silence settled over the chapel. 300 wedding guests sat in their pews, unsure whether to leave or stay, congratulate or commiserate. The minister stood at the altar looking like he'd never encountered this situation in seminary school. Henry remained at the altar, still wearing his tuxedo, staring at the doors where his bride had just been arrested. I wanted to go to him, but something held me back. This was his moment to process, to grieve, to figure out what came next. Finally, he turned to face the congregation. Well, he said, his voice carrying across the silent chapel. This is awkward. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I know this isn't how you expected to spend your Saturday afternoon. He paused, running a hand through his hair. The wedding is obviously canceled, but the reception is already paid for. So if anyone wants to stay for dinner in an open bar, you're welcome to it. God knows I could use a drink. This time the laughter was more genuine. People began standing, stretching, talking in small groups as the shock wore off and the reality of the situation set in. Henry finally looked in my direction. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and something that might have been admiration. He walked down the aisle toward me, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. When he reached me, he stopped and just stood there for a moment, studying my face. Mom, he said finally, we need to talk. I nodded. Yes, we do. But first, he reached up and carefully unclasped my grandmother's pearl necklace from around Rachel's throat. These belong to you. I took the pearls with shaking hands, feeling their familiar weight. Actually, they belong to the woman my son eventually marries, when he finds someone worthy of them. Henry's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Mom, for not believing you, for choosing her over you, for being such an idiot. You weren't an idiot, sweetheart. You were in love, or at least you were in love with the person you thought she was. I reached up and straightened his tie, a gesture I'd been making since he was old enough to wear clip-ons. Love makes us all vulnerable. The important thing is that you're safe. As we walked away from the altar together, Patricia Hayes approached us, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. Mrs. Wilson, Henry, she nodded to each of us. The FBI agents would like to speak with you both when you have a moment. They'll need statements about your interactions with Ms. Johnson. Henry looked confused. Who are you exactly, Patricia Hayes? She extended her hand. Private investigator. Your mother hired me to look into your fiancé's background. And how long have you been investigating her? Henry couldn't quite bring himself to say Rachel's name. About 2 weeks, Patricia replied. Long enough to uncover some very disturbing information. The FBI has been tracking her for much longer, but they lacked the concrete evidence needed for an arrest. Today changed that. Henry turned to me. You hired a private investigator. I nodded. After I overheard her on the phone with Jason, planning to take your money and run. I knew you wouldn't have believed me without proof. So you set up this whole elaborate sting operation instead of just talking to me. There was a hint of accusation in his voice. Would you have listened? I asked gently. He was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted finally. I was completely blinded. I would have thought you were just being overprotective. Which is exactly what Rachel was counting on, Patricia added. These con artists are experts at isolating their targets from anyone who might see through the deception. They create distance between their marks and the people who care about them most. Henry shook his head, still trying to process everything. I can't believe I was so stupid. You weren't stupid, I insisted. You were targeted by a professional who knew exactly what you wanted to hear. She studied you, learned your vulnerabilities, and became exactly the person you were looking for. Your mother's right, Patricia said. I've seen this dozens of times. Intelligent, successful people completely taken in by these scams. It's not about intelligence, it's about emotional manipulation. So what happens now? Henry asked. Patricia glanced toward the chapel doors where Special Agent Martin Coleman was speaking with Jason Davis. Rachel Johnson will be charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and possibly conspiracy. Given her prior convictions, she's looking at significant prison time. And Jason, I asked, will he face charges as well? He's cooperating with the FBI in exchange for immunity. His testimony will be crucial in building the case against Rachel and potentially uncovering other members of her network. Henry ran a hand through his hair. God, this is a nightmare. It's a nightmare that's over, I reminded him. Better to wake up now than 6 months into a marriage with someone who was planning to destroy you. Special Agent Coleman approached us, his expression professional but sympathetic. Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, I apologize for the dramatic interruption to your day, but I wanted to thank you for your assistance in apprehending Ms. Johnson. We've been tracking her activities for some time, but she's been remarkably adept at staying one step ahead of us. What exactly has she done? Henry asked, still struggling to reconcile the woman he'd fallen in love with and the criminal being described. Agent Coleman's expression darkened. Ms. Johnson is part of a sophisticated network of con artists who target vulnerable individuals for financial exploitation. In the past 5 years, she's assumed at least 7 different identities and defrauded victims of more than $500,000 collectively. And there's more, Patricia added, glancing at Agent Coleman for permission to continue. When he nodded, she turned back to Henry. Rachel is a person of interest in the death of Eleanor Covington, an elderly woman in Savannah who died under suspicious circumstances after confronting Rachel about stolen funds. Henry's face went pale. You think she murdered someone? We're reopening the investigation, Agent Coleman said carefully. The evidence is circumstantial, but with what we've learned today and Mr. Davis's cooperation, we may be able to build a case. I reached for Henry's hand, feeling him tremble slightly. This was more than either of us had anticipated, not just fraud, but possibly something far darker. We'll need both of you to come down to the field office to make formal statements, Agent Coleman continued. But it can wait until tomorrow. I understand this has been a challenging day. That's an understatement, Henry muttered. Agent Coleman handed us each his card. Call this number tomorrow morning, and we'll arrange a time. In the meantime, try to enjoy the rest of your evening. The hard part is over. As he walked away, Henry turned to me with a hollow laugh. Enjoy the evening. Right, my bride just got arrested for fraud and possible murder. But sure, let's party. Actually, I said, squeezing his hand, that's exactly what we should do. 300 people came here to celebrate with you. They're confused, concerned, and probably a little hungry. The best thing we can do right now is put on a brave face and show them that while this day didn't go as planned, we're going to be okay. Henry looked skeptical, but Patricia nodded in agreement. Your mother's right. I've seen enough victims of fraud to know that the worst thing you can do is hide away in shame. You did nothing wrong. Henry, you were victimized by a professional con artist. Hold your head high. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Then his shoulders straightened, and I saw a glimpse of the strong, confident man I'd raised. "All right," he said, offering me his arm. "Let's go face the music." The reception that wasn't a reception turned out to be the most honest party I'd ever attended. With the pretense of a wedding celebration stripped away, people relaxed in a way they never do at formal events. The bar opened early. The band played blues instead of wedding classics, and conversations flowed with the kind of authenticity that only comes after shared trauma. Henry handled himself with more grace than I dared hope. He worked the room like a politician, thanking people for coming, apologizing for the drama, and accepting condolences with good humor. I watched him from across the ballroom and felt a pride that had nothing to do with his professional achievements or his choice in women. This was my son showing real character under pressure. Jason Davis found me by the dessert table where I was contemplating whether it was appropriate to eat wedding cake when there hadn't actually been a wedding. "Mrs. Wilson," he extended his hand. "I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to face Rachel after all this time." I shook his hand. "I should thank you. I could never have exposed her without your help. What you did took guts. Not many mothers would go to those lengths to protect their child." "Any mother would have done the same thing," I said. Jason smiled. "No, ma'am. Most mothers would have tried to talk their son out of it and failed. You played chess while the rest of us were playing checkers." After he left, I found myself alone with my thoughts for the first time all day. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and something that might have been sadness. Yes, I'd saved Henry from a terrible marriage and potential financial ruin, but I'd also destroyed his faith in love, at least temporarily. Had I done the right thing, Mom? Henry appeared beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like you're having second thoughts." I accepted the glass gratefully. "Just wondering if there might have been a gentler way to handle this." "You mean like sitting me down and explaining that my fiancé was a con artist, because we both know how well I would have received that news." He had a point. "You would have thought I was jealous and controlling. I would have accused you of exactly what Rachel said, trying to keep me dependent on you forever." Henry sipped his champagne. "You know what changed my mind? It wasn't Jason showing up or even the recording. It was watching Rachel's face when she realized you'd outplayed her. For just a second, her mask slipped completely, and I saw who she really was underneath all that sweetness. What did you see? Cold calculation and genuine respect for a worthy opponent." He turned to look at me. "She underestimated you completely. She thought you were just a lonely old woman who'd do anything to keep her son happy. She had no idea she was trying to con someone smarter than she was." "I'm not sure about smarter," I mused. "Maybe just more motivated." "Mom, you orchestrated the exposure of a professional con artist using her own partner in the FBI. That wasn't just maternal instinct. That was strategy." We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching our friends and family enjoy the party that had risen from the ashes of disaster. The band was playing jazz now, and several couples had started dancing. "I have a confession," Henry said eventually. "What's that?" Part of me is relieved. He paused, searching for words. "Not about the public humiliation or the arrest, but something always felt off about Ava. I could never put my finger on it, but sometimes when I'd catch her off guard, she'd look at me like she was trying to remember who she was supposed to be." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I thought it was just wedding stress. And because," he sighed, "because I was 32 years old and had never been in love before. I thought if I questioned it too hard, it might disappear." My heart ached for him. "Oh, sweetheart. I know. Pathetic, right? The mama's boy who falls for the first pretty girl who pays attention to him." "No," I said firmly. "Human. You're human. And humans want to be loved. There's nothing pathetic about that. Even when they make terrible choices about who to trust." I paused. "Especially then," I took his hand. "Henry, what Rachel did to you, that wasn't your fault. She's a professional liar who studied you, learned what you wanted to hear, and became exactly that person. You weren't gullible. You were targeted." Henry squeezed my hand. "Thanks, Mom, for everything, for seeing through her, for protecting me, and for doing it in a way that made sure I couldn't ignore the truth." You're welcome. But next time you fall in love, maybe introduce me earlier in the process. He laughed. Next time I fall in love, I'm running a full background check first. That might be a bit extreme. After today, I don't think so. He grinned. Besides, I've learned something very important about the women in my life. What's that? Never underestimate a Wilson woman. We're apparently much more dangerous than we look. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Your grandmother would have been proud. She would have loved watching all this unfold. Henry raised his glass. Here's to justice. Served ice cold with a side of public humiliation. I raised my glass to meet his. Here's to family and knowing when to fight for the people you love. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, life had found a new normal. Henry had thrown himself into his work, earning a promotion at his software company. I had paid off the loan against my house using the surprisingly generous reward money from the FBI's recovery of assets from Rachel's network of scammers. The FBI investigation had expanded far beyond Rachel Johnson. Jason Davis's testimony had led to the arrest of 5 other con artists operating in the Southeast, and the reopening of 2 suspicious death cases, including Eleanor Covington's. Rachel herself was awaiting trial, having been denied bail due to her history of assuming false identities and the flight risk she presented. On a warm spring evening, I invited Henry over for dinner. It had become our weekly tradition, a time to reconnect and heal from the wounds Rachel had inflicted. Something smells amazing, Henry called as he let himself in, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package. Lasagna, I replied from the kitchen. Your grandmother's recipe? Henry set the wine on the counter and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. How was your week? Busy. The garden club is preparing for the spring tour, and I've been elected chairperson of the fundraising committee. Look at you, social butterfly, he teased, pouring us each a glass of wine. What about you? How's the new project going? Henry's face lit up as he launched into an explanation of his latest software development that I only partially understood, but I nodded and asked questions in the right places, happy to see him passionate about something again. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, covering everything from local politics to the latest true crime documentary we'd both been watching. It wasn't until dessert homemade apple pie that Henry placed the small wrapped package beside my plate. What's this? Open it and see. I carefully removed the wrapping paper to find a velvet jewelry box. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings, not my grandmother's, but new ones. Elegant and simple. Henry, they're beautiful. I wanted to replace the one that was lost. He explained. I know they're not the family heirlooms, but I thought maybe they could be the start of a new tradition. I blinked back tears, touched by the gesture. They're perfect. There's something else. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. The FBI returned this yesterday. They said it's no longer needed as evidence. I unfolded the paper to find the title deed to my house, the one I'd mortgaged to pay for the wedding. What's this about I paid it off? Henry said simply. All of it. Henry, that's too much. I was managing the payments just fine. He shook his head. You emptied your savings for a wedding that never happened, for a bride who was planning to rob us both. The least I could do was make sure you didn't lose your home because of it. But how? This was a substantial loan. Remember that software patent I was working on last year? It finally came through. The company bought the rights, and the bonus was significant. I started to protest, but Henry held up his hand. Mom, please, let me do this. You've been taking care of me my whole life. Let me take care of you for once. I nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. After a moment, I managed to say, Your father would be so proud of the man you've become. I hope so, Henry said quietly. I've been thinking about him a lot lately, about what he would have done if he'd been here when Rachel came into our lives. He would have seen through her in an instant, I said with a small smile. Your father could spot a phony from a mile away. Like mother, like father. Henry raised his glass. To Dad, who would have enjoyed the show. To Thomas, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. Who taught us both to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. We fell into a comfortable silence, enjoying the last bites of apple pie. Finally, Henry cleared his throat. There's something else I wanted to tell you. I've met someone. My heart skipped a beat. Oh, her name is Olivia. She's a software engineer at a competing firm. We met at a conference last month. He looked slightly embarrassed. And yes, I did run a background check. She's exactly who she says she is. I couldn't help but laugh. And she's brilliant, funny, kind. Nothing like Rachel. He hesitated. I'd like you to meet her. Maybe Sunday brunch next weekend. I'd love that, I said sincerely. Just go easy on her. Okay, no FBI agents or private investigators this time. I promise to be on my best behavior, I said, crossing my heart solemnly. Unless, of course, she mentions having grown up in 7 different cities or suggests borrowing family heirlooms. Henry groaned, but he was smiling. I'm never going to live this down, am I? Not a chance, sweetheart. It's going to be a family story for generations. Well, at least it has a happy ending, he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. We survived. We're okay. Better than okay, I corrected. We're stronger, wiser, and apparently more dangerous than we look, Henry added with a wink. Later that night, after Henry had gone home, I sat in my living room looking at the new pearl earrings. They weren't the family heirlooms that had been passed down through generations, but they represented something perhaps more valuable, a new beginning, a fresh start. I thought about Rachel Johnson, sitting in her jail cell awaiting trial. I wondered if she ever reflected on her mistakes, if she regretted targeting us or just regretted getting caught. I hoped, for her sake, that she might someday find redemption, though I doubted it would come in this lifetime. I thought about Jason Davis, who had found a measure of peace in helping to bring Rachel to justice, and who was now working with the FBI to help other victims of similar scams. Most of all, I thought about Henry, who had faced heartbreak and betrayal with courage and resilience, who was cautiously opening his heart again, despite the risk. His willingness to trust after everything he'd been through was perhaps the greatest victory of all. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled at the woman looking back at me. Not just a widow, not just a mother, but a fighter who had protected what mattered most. Rachel had underestimated me, believing that at 67 I was too old, too trusting, too desperate for grandchildren to pose any threat to her plans. She'd never understood that a mother's love is the most powerful force on earth and the most dangerous when threatened. Some weddings are meant to happen, bringing 2 people together in love and commitment. Others, like the spectacular disaster we'd experienced, are meant to fall apart, revealing truths that might otherwise remain hidden. The wedding that never happened had taught us all an invaluable lesson. Sometimes love means fighting for someone even when they don't realize they need saving. Sometimes it means risking their anger to protect their future. And sometimes it means orchestrating the most dramatic wedding interruption in Charleston's history, complete with FBI agents, handcuffs, and a 300-person audience. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled at the thought of Sunday brunch with Henry and his new friend Olivia. I wouldn't need private investigators or elaborate stings this time. Just the wisdom that comes from experience and the protective instincts that had served me well. After all, once you've crashed your son's wedding and had his bride arrested, ordinary mother-in-law scrutiny seems positively tame by comparison. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And if you enjoyed my story, don't forget to check out these 2 other channel favorites. My daughter-in-law banned me from seeing my grandchildren until I changed my will. And, after 40 years of marriage, my husband left me for his secretary. What happened next shocked everyone.